am just going to try and be brief and introduce you to the next book, Warriors Don't Cry by Melba Beals. You'll see I posted an interview with Beals that she had on C-SPAN in 1994, which doesn't on the surface sound riveting, and it's old, but I think if you take the time to listen to it, it's going to prep you well for the book and really shows how much effort that Beals went into to write this book, including emotional work on the inside. And I think that when you read the book, you'll see how she's able to tell the story of what happened to her, very traumatic, without bitterness and maybe some of the emotions that might turn off the reader. So she's able to capture the emotional impact, but she's not off-putting the reader, which I think is really difficult to do, and just goes to show how much effort that can go into writing, including time, including soul searching. The second activity that I'm going to assign leading up to the paper is looking at some of the headlines of the time, and it will show you that even though Beals was going through a terrible ordeal when she and her fellow high school students tried to integrate a high school in Little Rock, she had other resources. She had culture on her side. She had allies. She also had the press. The press was interested in their story. So in that sense, if you can contemporize it and think about the role of the press in activism. She also had strong family support, and she also had cultural support from her church and her religion. So I call the toolkit that she had to survive this ordeal Tools of Resilience, and that's just one frame for thinking about Beals and how she coped at this time. So some of the themes that we'll be looking at to kind of pull through the class is civil rights, writing about civil rights, reflection as a component to writing, trauma, and tools of survival, tools of resistance. So I'm not going to go on too much about Beals. I'm going to let you discover it for yourself through her interview and through the next activity. The paper will require you to do the similar work as the other paper, bringing in direct evidence, and then also finding some kind of way to contextualize it further with an outside source of your pick. You can use the research, the interview that I chose. You can use some of those newspapers. There's a ton of stuff written about Beals's life and the life of her contemporaries, the other members of Little Rock Nine. So you can get kind of overwhelmed. So I would say, again, just stick with coming up with the main idea, using direct support, finding something that inspires you to think about the book more deeply. So before I go, I am just going to give you some brief feedback on your last paper, paper number 3, and I have to say the papers were pretty good. I think the people who might have struggled were those who didn't quite have a strong main idea, and there was just a lot of ideas in the paper. So even though that maybe didn't make for a strong paper, I saw that people were really working on their writing, and I was impressed with that. So I'm just going to give you a couple tips from some strong papers, and then I'm going to let you go vote, or maybe whatever you're going to do today, avoid the world, social media. So I'm just going to go over this particular paper, just parts of it. Okay, so what I was encouraging you to do is take a look at maybe one scene that might be symbolic or indicative of a larger themes in the book. So this writer took a look at Brown's pig Daisy and made the point that Daisy was some ways analogous to Brown's drug addiction. So that's a strong statement, and I think it works. And then once you kind of come up with the big main idea, you have a lot to say, right? Just by using the examples from the text. So here we have just an example, what I've kind of pushing, that when you use the text, you don't have to throw a bunch of words in there. Just come up with some phrases. What are the things that Brown says? What was he thinking? And then once you have that text at your disposal, you have more to play with. And then you don't have to think of every word yourself. So this was, I would say, I call this close reading, close analysis. And that can really help you dig in, especially if you frame the direct evidence with a strong main idea. And then another example is I'm just going to show you is a writer doing a good job connecting ideas and connecting sources. So what I've been asking you to do, obviously, is to bring in the interview, right? And so this writer did a good move during an interview with CNN. What was the interview? Who was he talking to? Sometimes you don't even really need to go there. Just say, who was the interview with? And one of the things that Brown said, okay, so some people kind of get tripped up with how to integrate that into their papers. Say, don't overthink it. And then also the writer brought in some research about addiction. So, and then brings up that Brown's brother also fell to addiction. So even though the writer, and while the writer's juggling with a variety of texts to make the point, the writer's also sticking with this idea of addiction. So lining up and comparing ideas and bringing in outside sources can help you write, and then also comparing and connecting can really help the reader make connections too. So good writing, I would say, is basically a game of compare and contrast, if you remember that from third grade. So you don't really have to run out of things to say if you continue to compare and think about how things are related. Most books, if you look closely at a scene or a few ideas, you'll unlock a lot more themes than you think. I think that can be true with Warriors Don't Cry. Stick with a couple scenes, some main ideas, and try not to be like all over the place when you're sitting down to write. So I told you I was going to make this short, so that's what I have for you today. I hope you like the book Warriors Don't Cry. Good job with the last paper. Hang in there, everybody.